Story begins inside a grand private mansion, where a wealthy millionaire often hosted extravagant parties meant to impress influential guests. The mansion was elegant and carefully designed with tall ceilings, polished floors, and soft light, filling every corner. Music played quietly in the background, and servers moved gracefully through the room carrying drinks and plates while guests laughed and spoke loudly. The millionaire was known for his sharp humor and commanding presence. He enjoyed being admired and often used public moments to assert control and entertain himself. Many guests laughed at his jokes, even when they felt uncomfortable, because his approval mattered that evening. He was in high spirits, enjoying the attention and the energy of the crowd. Among the staff working that night was a young waitress who had recently started the job. She moved quietly and carefully, keeping her eyes low and her work precise. She came from a modest background, and the job meant stability for her and her family. She had stay invisible in places where wealth and power ruled. What no one in the room knew was that music was a deep part of her life. She had grown up around an old piano at her grandmother's home. She practiced whenever she could, often late at night after long days of work. Music was her escape and her comfort, not something she shared openly. As the party grew louder, the millionaire noticed her. While she was serving drinks near the center of the room, he watched her for a moment and smiled as if an idea had formed. He raised his voice and called for attention. The room slowly quieted as guests turned toward him. He began speaking loudly, making jokes about the party and the entertainment. Then he pointed toward the grand piano positioned near the wall. He announced that the waitress would play the piano for everyone. His tone suggested amusement, not encouragement. A ripple of excitement moved through the crowd. Some guests laughed, others leaned forward, curious. The idea of a waitress being put on the spot amused many. They expected awkwardness and embarrassment. The waitress froze when she realized he was speaking about her. Her heart began to race, and her hands tightened around the tray she was holding. She looked around, unsure if she had heard correctly. The millionaire repeated himself, smiling confidently. He said it would be fun, and that everyone should enjoy the moment. He framed it as harmless entertainment. The guests responded with laughter and clapping. No one considered how she felt. She felt exposed and small, standing in the center of the room. She wanted to disappear into the background, her mind filled with doubt and fear. She knew the piano well, but she had never played in front of such a crowd. The millionaire gestured toward the piano and waited. The room was watching now. The excitement felt heavy and expectant. The waitress felt trapped by attention and power. She considered refusing, but feared losing her job. She thought of her family and the stability she needed. She felt tears press behind her eyes, but forced herself to breathe. Slowly she nodded and placed the tray down. She walked toward the piano, feeling every step. The room grew quieter as curiosity replaced laughter. She stood beside the piano and looked at the keys. Memories flooded her mind of late nights practicing alone, of music filling empty rooms and helping her feel strong. The millionaire leaned back, satisfied, convinced he had created a moment of amusement. He expected clumsy notes and nervous mistakes. The guests waited, eager for the spectacle. The waitress sat at the bench. Her hands hovered above the keys. She took a deep breath, grounding herself. The room was silent now. Everyone waited. Part 1 ends at the moment before the first note is played. When humiliation hangs in the air, excitement fills the crowd, and the waitress prepares to let music speak for her. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. The waitress pressed the first key gently, and the sound surprised the room because it was clear, steady, and confident. It was not loud, and it was not rushed. The note carried calm and intention, and it immediately changed the energy in the hall. She continued playing, and the melody formed naturally under her fingers. Her posture relaxed as muscle memory guided her hands. Years of quiet practice returned to her. In that moment, she was no longer standing in front of strangers. She was back in the familiar world of sound. And feeling the guests slowly stopped whispering. Some leaned forward without realizing it. Others straightened in their seats as the music began to fill the space. The expected laughter never came. Instead, curiosity grew into attention. The millionaire's smile stiffened slightly. He watched closely, trying to understand what he was hearing. This was not random playing. This was controlled discipline and emotion working together. The confidence he felt moments ago began to soften. The waitress kept her eyes on the keys. She did not look at the crowd. She did not play to impress. She played to stay steady. Each note grounded her further and eased the fear she had carried. The melody deepened and moved through the room like a quiet story. It held sadness, warmth, and strength. The sound was rich without being dramatic. It asked the room to listen rather than react. The guests began to exchange glances. What they expected to be humiliating now felt intimate. Some shifted uncomfortably, realizing their excitement had been misplaced. Others felt moved without knowing why. The millionaire crossed his arms slowly. He no longer looked amused. He looked uncertain. The attention he commanded earlier had shifted away from him. The room now belonged to the piano, and the woman playing it. The waitress reached a more complex passage. Her fingers moved with precision and ease. There was no hesitation, no sign of panic. The years of hidden effort were visible now through sound. The staff along the walls had stopped working. They stood still, listening. They recognized the courage it took to continue. The waitress was no longer just one of them. She was a voice being heard. The music softened and slowed. The quiet grew heavier. No one dared interrupt. The party felt suspended in time. The millionaire felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. He realized the challenge he had announced was no longer entertaining. It was revealing, and what it revealed was not weakness, but strength. The waitress played the final section with care. She allowed space between notes. She trusted silence as much as sound. The piano responded warmly, as if honoring her restraint. When the last note faded, the room remained silent. No one clapped. Immediately, the stillness felt full and respectful. It carried understanding. The waitress' hands rested lightly on the keys. She breathed slowly. She did not look up. She did not seek approval. The millionaire stood frozen. The joke he had planned felt distant and hollow. The idea of humiliation had vanished. What remained was awe and discomfort. Applause began slowly from one corner of the room, then another. Soon the entire hall filled with clapping, not loud and chaotic, but steady and sincere. The waitress finally lifted her head. She saw faces changed by what they had heard. There was no laughter now, only respect. Part 2 ends with the party transformed, the excitement replaced by silence and applause, the intended humiliation undone by truth, and the waitress seated calmly, having spoken through music without saying a. The applause continued to echo through the room, and it felt different from the applause that usually followed entertainment at such parties. It was slower, deeper, and filled with reflection rather than excitement. People were not celebrating a performance, they were responding to something honest. They had not expected to witness. The waitress remained seated for a moment after the sound of clapping began. Her hands rested in her lap, and her shoulders rose and fell as she breathed. Only then did she stand slowly and turn toward the guests. Her face showed calm and relief, but not pride. She gave a small respectful nod and stepped back from the piano. The millionaire stood in place longer than anyone noticed. His expression had changed completely. The confident smile that once entertained the room was gone. In its place was uncertainty mixed with surprise. For the first time that evening, he did not know how to control the moment. The room waited. Some guests glanced at him, expecting a comment or joke. Others kept their eyes on the waitress. They sensed that the balance of power had shifted quietly, but clearly. The millionaire finally spoke, and his voice was lower than before. He said that the performance was unexpected. The words sounded careful, as if he were choosing them slowly. There was no laughter behind them, only acknowledgement. The waitress nodded politely. She did not respond verbally. She felt that music had already spoken enough. Standing there under attention still felt strange, but it no longer felt threatening. A guest near the front stepped forward and asked where she had learned to play. The question was not mocking, it was sincere. The waitress answered softly, saying she had learned at home from her grandmother piano, and through practice. That answer moved through the room quietly. People had expected lessons, privilege, or opportunity. Instead, they heard effort, patience, and love. This contrast unsettled assumptions many had carried. The millionaire listened closely. He looked at the piano, then back at the waitress. He realized that the joke he had planned had exposed something else entirely, not her weakness, but his carelessness. He cleared his throat and said that talent like that should not be hidden. The sentence felt unfamiliar on his tongue. It was not rehearsed. It came from realization rather than pride. The waitress felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. The tension that had gripped her earlier slowly released. She wanted to return to her work and disappear into routine. Yet she also understood that something had changed. The host of the party stepped in gently and suggested continuing the evening. People welcomed. The transition music resumed softly, and conversations returned, but the tone of the room was different. Guests spoke more quietly now. They referenced the music rather than the joke. Some admitted they had expected embarrassment. Others said they felt ashamed of their excitement. The piano had become a subject of respect rather than amusement. The waitress moved toward the edge of the room where other staff stood. They looked at her with expressions of pride and support. One gave her a small reassuring smile. She returned it gratefully. The millionaire watched this from a distance. He noticed how she carried herself. There was no arrogance, no demand for attention, only dignity. He realized that humiliation had been replaced by something far more powerful: perspective. The moment had not entertained the room, it had educated it. Later in the evening, the millionaire approached her again. This time, there was no crowd gathering around. He spoke quietly and asked her name. She told him. He repeated it slowly, as if acknowledging her presence properly. For the first time, he said he had not intended harm. The words were simple and imperfect. They did not erase the moment, but they acknowledged it. The waitress thanked him calmly. She did not argue or accuse. She understood that apology did not always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it arrived through humility. The millionaire looked again at the piano and said it should be played more often, not as entertainment, but as expression. He stepped away after that without further comment. As the party drew closer to its end, guests prepared to leave. Some stopped to thank the waitress personally. Others nodded respectfully. The excitement they had once felt now felt misplaced. When the waitress finally stepped outside into the night air, she felt lighter. The noise of the city grounded her. She replayed the sound of the piano in her mind, not the audience, not the laughter, just the music inside the mansion. The piano stood quietly once more, but it no longer felt like decoration. It felt like a witness. Part 3 ends with the room changed. The crowd humbled. The millionaire reflective, and the waitress stepping forward, not as someone humiliated, but as someone seen and respected. Through the simple courage of playing what she knew by heart, the party slowly moved toward its later hours. Yet the earlier moment remained present. In every corner of the room, people spoke more quietly and with greater care, as if aware that something meaningful had taken place. The waitress returned to her duties, moving among the guests again. But the way she was seen had changed. She was no longer invisible, and no longer a source of amusement. She was treated with respect and gentle acknowledgement. Some guests offered brief words of thanks when she passed. Others simply smiled or stepped aside to give her space. She accepted these gestures politely, but did not linger. She wanted the night to end so she could return to normal life. The attention, though respectful, still felt heavy. The staff around her noticed the difference as well. They worked with a shared understanding that something important had happened. There were no loud comments or exaggerated reactions, only quiet support and subtle pride. The millionaire remained in conversation with a small group near the center of the room. His voice was calmer than before, and his gestures restrained. Those who knew him well sensed that he was thinking deeply. He listened more than he spoke, and nodded. Often the shift was noticeable from time to time. His eyes moved toward the piano. It stood silent now, yet carried presence. He realized that he had never truly considered it more than an object now. It represented a moment he could not ignore. As the evening progressed, some guests began to leave. They offered polite farewells and expressed appreciation for the gathering. More than once someone mentioned the music not as gossip, but as gratitude. This surprised the host. The waitress finished her tasks and was given permission to step away for a short rest. She found a quiet corner near the back hallway and sat down. Her body felt tired, but her mind felt clear. She replayed the feeling of the keys under her fingers, the calm that had arrived when fear faded. She thought about her grandmother and the old piano at home. She remembered being told that music should be played with honesty, not pride. Those words felt alive now. The millionaire eventually excused himself from the guests and walked toward the piano. He stood beside it alone for a moment. He did not touch it. He simply stood there reflecting. He thought about the way he had announced the performance, the excitement he had stirred, the assumption that embarrassment was harmless. He understood now that such moments could leave lasting marks. He did not feel anger toward himself. He felt awareness. He realized that influence carried weight whether intended or not. Later, he sought out the head of staff and asked quietly about the waitress. He did not ask for details, only whether she was all right. The question surprised the staff member. She answered honestly that the waitress was fine and grateful for the kindness shown. Afterward, the millionaire nodded and said nothing more. There was no announcement, no correction, no display, only consideration. When the party ended and the guests had gone, the mansion felt still. The lights dimmed and the music stopped. Staff cleaned quietly, returning the space to order. The waitress gathered her belongings and prepared to leave. She walked past the piano one last time. She paused briefly and touched the edge of the bench. A silent thank you passed through her mind, not to the room, not to the people, but to the music itself. Outside, the night air felt cool and grounding. She breathed deeply and felt her body relax. She knew the next day would bring routine and work, yet she also knew something inside her had settled. She had faced humiliation and found strength not through words, not through confrontation, but through expression. Inside the mansion, the millionaire stood alone in the quiet hall. He looked around at the empty space. The laughter had faded, the excitement had passed. What remained was clarity. He understood that wealth could command attention, but not truth. Truth arrived only when space was given. The waitress had shown him that. He resolved quietly to change how he used his voice and presence, not dramatically, not publicly, but consistently. Part 4 ends with the night closing gently. The waitress leaves with dignity and tact and trust strengthened. The millionaire remains with awareness awakened and restraint forming. And the piano stands silent yet meaningful, holding the echo of a moment that reshaped how power, respect, and humanity were understood within that grand room. In the days after the party, life returned to its usual rhythm, yet the experience stayed quietly present for the waitress. She returned to work shifts where guests came and went, and music played softly in the background. At first, everything looked the same, but she felt different inside. She moved with a steadier sense of self and no longer shrank when attention passed near her. At home, she sat at the old piano that had been part of her life for years. The keys were familiar and worn, and the sound was imperfect. She played slowly, letting each note settle. She realized that the moment at the mansion had not changed her love for music. It had confirmed it. Music had carried her through fear. Without needing defense, her family noticed her calm. They did not ask for details, because they sensed the importance of letting her process the moment in her own time. When she played, they listened quietly. There was pride, but it was gentle and grounded. No one spoke about opportunities or future plans. They spoke about effort and honesty. At work, some coworkers asked what it felt like to play in front of many people. She answered simply, saying it was difficult but meaningful. She did not exaggerate. She did not seek admiration. Her calm response set the tone. Management treated her with quiet respect. There were no special announcements or changes in role, yet the way people spoke to her shifted. She was listened to more carefully. This made her feel seen rather than elevated. The millionaire also carried the experience into his daily life. Meetings, events, and social gatherings continued as usual, yet his behavior showed subtle changes. He spoke less and listened more. He noticed how often he had used humor to dominate conversations. He reflected on how easily power could shape moments. The challenge he had announced now felt careless. He did not frame it as regret. He framed it as learning. He began to attend smaller music events quietly without bringing attention to himself. He listened without comment. He allowed the music to exist without judgment. This practice grounded him. At home, he asked that the piano be played more often during gatherings, not as entertainment, but as expression. He noticed how this changed the atmosphere. Guests listened rather than laughed. The waitress continued practicing consistently. Some days she felt confident, other days doubt returned. She learned to accept both. She understood that growth included uncertainty. She began helping a younger coworker who expressed interest in music. She shared simple exercises and encouraged patience. She remembered how vulnerable she had felt. This empathy shaped her guidance. Word of the party spread slowly through social circles. It was not dramatic. People spoke about it with respect. They described the music more than the challenge. The waitress heard fragments, but did not engage. The millionaire considered how to support music education quietly. He explored local programs and spoke with organizers. He did not attach his name publicly. He wanted the support to matter more than recognition. As weeks passed, the memory of the party softened. It no longer felt sharp. It became part of a larger understanding for both of them. The waitress moved forward with patience. She trusted her voice without seeking validation. The millionaire moved forward with restraint. He trusted listening more than control. Neither sought to define the moment. They allowed it to shape them naturally. Part 5 ends with life continuing steadily, The waitress deepens her relationship with music through trust and consistency. The millionaire deepens his understanding of influence through humility and awareness, and the quiet lesson of that night continues to guide choices not through drama, but through respect and care. As more time passed, the waitress began to notice how the experience had reshaped her inner voice, rather than her outward life. She still worked long shifts and moved through rooms where people rarely noticed her. Yet she no longer felt invisible to herself. That change mattered most. Music became a steady anchor. She practiced whenever she could, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes late at night. She no longer practiced with urgency. She practiced with care. Each session felt like a conversation rather than a test. She explored new pieces, slowly allowing herself to make mistakes and learn from them. She listened closely to how emotion shaped sound. She learned when to let notes breathe and when to hold them back. This patience deepened her confidence. At work, she carried herself differently. She spoke when necessary and remained calm under pressure. Coworkers sensed the steadiness and responded with trust. She did not demand respect. She embodied it. Some guests recognized her from the party. They did not mention the humiliation. They mentioned the music. This shift affirmed that the moment had truly changed how she was seen. The millionaire continued his own quiet transformation. He found himself more attentive in conversations. He noticed when others were interrupted or dismissed. He began creating space rather than filling it. This change was not dramatic. It unfolded in small decisions. Who he listened to, when he paused, what he chose not to say. He reflected often on how laughter had once felt harmless. He understood now that it could carry weight. This awareness guided his restraint. He continued supporting music initiatives quietly. He attended rehearsals without announcement. He listened from the back of rooms. He learned names and stories. This grounded him in ways success never had. The waitress accepted an invitation to play at a small community gathering. The space was modest and welcoming. She felt nervous but steady. She played with honesty and restraint. The audience listened fully. Afterwards, several people thanked her simply for the feeling the music gave them. That response mattered more than praise. It reminded her why she played. She began mentoring a younger colleague who loved music but lacked confidence. She guided her, patiently sharing exercises and encouragement. She did not push. She remembered how fear softened when met with safety. The millionaire heard about the gathering indirectly. He felt quiet satisfaction knowing the waitress continued playing. He did not reach out. He trusted her path. Both lives moved forward separately, yet shaped by the same understanding. That listening created dignity. That expression did not need permission. The waitress faced moments of doubt when progress felt slow. She remembered that growth was not linear. She stayed patient. This protected her joy. The millionaire faced moments when old habits tempted him. He caught himself and chose differently. This strengthened his leadership. Neither spoke publicly about the party. It was not needed. The lesson lived in action. Part 6 ends with both continuing forward, grounded in the same quiet truth. Talent flourishes when given respect. Influence grows when guided by humility. And music remains a language that reveals character more clearly than words ever could. As the years continued, the waitress grew into a woman whose confidence was quiet but unmistakable. She no longer measured herself by how others saw her. She measured herself by how honestly she lived and how faithfully she listened to her own voice. Music remained part of her life, not as an escape, but as a companion. She continued working for some time because stability mattered. Yet she no longer believed her role defined her worth. She walked into rooms with calm awareness and spoke with clarity when needed. People sensed her presence even when she remained silent. Her relationship with music matured. She practiced less for perfection and more for understanding. She explored how feeling shaped sound and how silence carried meaning. She learned that music was not about being seen. It was about being true. She began performing occasionally in small spaces, community halls, schools, private gatherings. Each time she played, she created a space of calm. People listened fully and often stayed quiet long after she finished. They thanked her not with excitement but with sincerity. Teaching became a natural extension of her journey. She guided others who felt unseen or unsure. She created environments where fear softened. She reminded students that mistakes were part of learning. That patience mattered more than speed. Those she taught grew not only as musicians but as people. They learned to listen to themselves and others. They learned that expression did not need permission. This impact fulfilled her deeply. The millionaire also continued forward, shaped by the same moment, though his path looked different. His public life remained active, yet his inner life had changed. He no longer sought moments of dominance. He valued moments of connection. He became known for fairness and attentiveness. People noticed that he listened before speaking, that he created space for others. This presence earned trust. He supported creative work quietly. He believed that influence should lift rather than test. He mentored selectively and listened carefully. Those he guided felt respected rather than judged. At times he reflected on the party not with regret, but with gratitude. He understood that the experience had taught him something essential. That power without care could harm. That humility strengthened leadership. The waitress and the millionaire never crossed paths again. They did not need to. Their lives remained connected through shared understanding. Both had learned that dignity emerged when listening replaced assumption. The story of that night faded from conversation. It was not retold dramatically. Those who remembered it spoke of music, not mockery. This preserved its meaning. The waitress faced challenges as life unfolded. Moments of doubt, fatigue, and change. She adapted without losing herself. She trusted her voice and her pace. The millionaire faced transitions as well. Changing roles, shifting priorities. He accepted these changes with grace. He focused on contribution rather than control. Both came to understand that influence was measured by depth, not scale. That a single moment could guide a lifetime. This understanding shaped their decisions. Part 7 closes with both firmly rooted in values shaped by listening, respect, and restraint. The waitress steps forward with confidence grounded in self-trust. The millionaire steps forward with wisdom grounded in awareness. Their shared moment lives on not as a story of humiliation, but as a foundation of dignity that continues to guide how they move through the world, how they treat others, and how they honor the quiet power of music used with care. As the final chapter of this story unfolds, what remains most important is not the party or the humiliation that was intended, but the quiet transformation that followed for both lives. The waitress, now fully grown into her own sense of identity, carried the lessons of that night without holding onto its pain. She no longer defined herself by where she worked or how others perceived her. She defined herself by the care she brought into everything she did. Music stayed with her not as a dream that demanded success, but as a steady language she trusted. There were seasons when she played often and seasons when life required her attention elsewhere. During those quieter times, she never felt guilt. She understood that music waited patiently and returned warmth whenever she came back to it. When she did play, she chose spaces where listening mattered. Small rooms, community gatherings, quiet evenings where people came to feel rather than judge. She approached the piano with calm respect. Her hands carried confidence shaped by patience, not urgency. Those who listened felt grounded rather than impressed. Teaching became one of her greatest sources of fulfillment. She guided students who felt unseen or uncertain. She offered them safety first, then skill. She taught them that silence was part of learning and that mistakes were not failures. Many of those students carried her lessons into their own lives. They learned to speak honestly and listen deeply. She never told the story of the mansion as a lesson. She believed truth was strongest when lived quietly. Those who knew her felt encouraged, not inspired by spectacle. That was enough. The millionaire reached a later stage of life shaped by reflection rather than ambition. His influence remained, but his approach had softened. He no longer measured moments by reaction. He valued depth and understanding. He continued supporting creative spaces without drawing attention. He listened more than he spoke. He learned names and stories. He understood that presence mattered more than authority. He often reflected on how a single careless announcement had revealed something essential. Not about the waitress, but about himself. That awareness guided his restraint for years to come. The two never reunited. They did not exchange letters or acknowledgements. Their connection lived in action, not memory. They had both learned what they needed. As time passed, the story of that night faded from public memory. It was not recorded or celebrated, yet its influence remained alive in small decisions. In how people listened, in how they treated those with less power. The waitress aged with humility and tact. She adapted to change without fear. She trusted her pace. She accepted limitations without losing purpose. The millionaire aged with awareness. He accepted transitions without resistance. He focused on contribution rather than control. This brought peace. Neither sought credit for growth. Neither claimed transformation. They simply allowed learning to guide them. The piano that once stood as a symbol of status fulfilled a different role. It had spoken truth without accusation. It had revealed dignity without demand. The story ends quietly, not with triumph or regret, but with continuity. Music continues to be played. Voices continue to be heard. Silence continues to teach. What endures is the understanding that respect reveals talent more clearly than humiliation. That listening reshapes power more deeply than dominance. And that one honest moment can guide a lifetime without ever asking to be remembered. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. To be remembered. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them.